treatment's done.
Yes.
So I can crack on and get back to normal again, but actually the phase afterwards is really,
Silence surrounded Catherine's condition. A silence carefully maintained, tightly controlled, and deeply intentional. The palace spoke in measured phrases, offering reassurance without detail, calm without clarity. But just moments ago, that silence cracked in a way few expected. Not from an official statement, not from a senior royal aide, but from someone who stood closest when cameras were gone, Catherine's private nurse. Her words were brief, unplanned, and quietly devastating. It was worse than we thought. No elaboration followed. No dramatic pause. Just a sentence that instantly reframed everything the public believed it understood. Until now, the narrative had been one of cautious optimism and controlled recovery. Appearances were postponed. Language was softened. Concern was acknowledged but never allowed to deepen. That balance suggested management, a situation serious, yes, but contained. The nurse's remark shatters that assumption. Those words do not suggest inconvenience or temporary struggle. They suggest intensity. They imply moments unseen, decisions made under pressure, and fears held behind closed doors. When someone trained to remain silent speaks at all, it is rarely accidental. And when they choose words that heavy, it signals something far more complex than routine care. What makes this moment especially unsettling is not what was said, but what was not corrected. There has been no immediate denial, no clarification, no attempt to soften the impact. In royal communication, silence after a breach can be as revealing as a statement itself. This is the first time someone from inside Catherine's most protected circle has hinted that the reality may have been far more severe than presented. And once that door opens, even slightly, it changes how every past update, every delayed appearance, every careful phrase is now understood. Because if it truly was worse than we thought, then what exactly were we not meant to see? After the initial reassurance from the palace, daily life appeared to resume its careful rhythm. Engagements were postponed rather than canceled. Language remained calm, almost deliberately neutral. On the surface, it suggested a situation being managed with confidence and discretion. But within palace systems, such moderation often signals something else entirely. Containment. Those familiar with royal medical arrangements explain that when a senior royal's condition crosses a certain threshold, communication narrows dramatically. Information is shared vertically, not horizontally. Even trusted aides receive fragments, not the full picture. This protects stability, but it also creates a controlled public narrative that may not reflect the emotional intensity unfolding privately. During this period, Catherine's absence was framed as precautionary. Recovery was described as gradual, careful, and responsible. Nothing in the official language suggested urgency. Yet behind that language, decisions were reportedly being made with unusual speed. Schedules were held in limbo. Travel plans were repeatedly revised. Contingencies were prepared quietly, without explanation. Medical professionals involved in high-profile care often operate under extraordinary pressure. Their priority is not public reassurance, but outcome. In such cases, optimism is communicated outward only when it is useful, not when it is complete. Silence fills the gaps where certainty does not yet exist. What is now becoming clearer is that this was not a period of simple observation. It was a period of vigilance. Monitoring replaced planning. Stability replaced ambition. Energy was treated as a limited resource, guarded carefully and spent only when necessary. William's role during this time shifted almost imperceptibly. He remained present, visible when required, but increasingly protective. Appearances were shorter. His tone became more deliberate. There was no visible alarm, but there was focus. The kind that emerges when personal concern outweighs public rhythm. Catherine herself maintained complete silence. No personal messages. No indirect reassurance. No emotional framing. For someone accustomed to engaging warmly and openly, that absence was notable. But those who understand recovery know that silence is often chosen, when strength is being conserved rather than displayed. Within palace walls, this phase was reportedly described as holding steady. Not moving forward. Not stepping back. Simply holding. That phrase alone suggests uncertainty. A need to wait, to watch, and to respond rather than initiate. What the public saw was restraint. What was happening privately may have been something closer to endurance. This is why the nurse's later words landed with such force. They did not contradict official statements. They exposed the emotional truth behind them. Severity does not always require dramatic language. Sometimes it is revealed in how carefully everything else is managed. The absence of correction following the nurse's comment reinforced this interpretation. In moments where a narrative truly threatens accuracy, the palace responds quickly. Clarifications appear. Sources speak. Here, there was nothing. That silence allowed the remark to stand, not as fact, but as context. Looking back, the signs align. The measured pacing. The narrowed access. The emphasis on privacy. None of it proves crisis. But together, it suggests that reassurance was built on something fragile, something that required time, patience, and unwavering focus. This was not about hiding reality. It was about surviving it quietly. And in royal life, quiet survival often leaves the deepest imprint. As the days passed, the distance between what was said publicly and what was carried privately began to widen. Not through contradiction, but through omission. The palace continued to project steadiness, yet behind that steadiness was a system operating in a reduced, guarded mode. This is often the clearest indicator that something is being navigated rather than announced. Sources familiar with royal routines point to a subtle but telling shift. Decision-making became centralized. Where once plans moved through layers of discussion, they now required fewer approvals but greater caution. That kind of adjustment does not happen unless margins feel narrow. When time matters, processes compress. Medical care at this level functions within two realities at once. One is clinical. The other is symbolic. Every step must protect the patient while preserving continuity. In Catherine's case, that balance appears to have demanded exceptional discipline. Nothing moved forward without contingency. Nothing was framed as final until it truly was. During this period, communication strategy followed a familiar pattern used only in serious circumstances. Language was simplified. Updates were spaced out. Complexity was removed from public-facing statements. This does not signal ease. It signals risk management. When details multiply, so do interpretations. Those close to the situation describe an atmosphere that was calm on the surface, but intensely focused. Underneath. Not frantic. Not chaotic. Focused. The kind of focus that leaves little room for anything else. Family time was prioritized not as comfort, but as structure. Normal routines were maintained where possible, because predictability stabilizes uncertainty. William's presence during this phase became increasingly intentional. He did not expand his role publicly, but privately his involvement deepened. He was reportedly present for decisions most partners would never see. This was not symbolic support. It was operational. When health concerns intersect with public duty, trust becomes essential. And trust requires proximity. Observers later noted that even when he appeared outwardly composed, there was a shift in his posture, a guarded attentiveness that suggested readiness rather than routine. This was not the demeanor of someone reassured. It was the demeanor of someone prepared. Catherine's condition, whatever its specifics, demanded patience rather than progress. That distinction matters. Progress implies direction. Patience implies waiting. And waiting is often harder than acting. It requires restraint not only from the patient, but from everyone around them. In such environments, medical professionals often speak cautiously even among themselves. Certainty is deferred. Outcomes are not predicted. Language remains conditional. It is within that context that the nurse's later words gain meaning. Worse than we thought is not an assessment made lightly. It reflects a moment when expectation collided with reality. Importantly, this does not mean decline. It means complexity. A situation that did not follow the expected course. A condition that demanded more attention, more adjustment, more time than initially anticipated. The palace's refusal to elaborate afterward reinforces this interpretation. There was no effort to clarify severity or minimize concern. Instead, communication continued along the same restrained path. That consistency suggests alignment rather than confusion. The system did not react because it had already adapted. Another detail worth noting is the timing of reassurance itself. Public calm often follows private stabilization, not the other way around. Reassurance is issued when risk has passed its peak, even if recovery remains ongoing. That sequence allows confidence to be genuine, even if incomplete. This would explain why earlier statements were careful but composed. Not because the situation was simple, but because it was under control earned through vigilance rather than ease. For the family, this period likely redefined priorities. Long-term plans became secondary. Flexibility became essential. The future was not mapped. It was left open. That openness is rarely visible from the outside, but it shapes everything. Children, in particular, anchor such moments. Their routines provide structure. Their presence offers perspective. Shielding them from anxiety while maintaining honesty requires balance. Those who know the family suggest that this balance was maintained with care, reinforcing stability even when adults carried uncertainty. The nurse's comment, then, did not introduce new information. It introduced emotional truth. Emotional truth often arrives after danger has passed, when memory is no longer managed by adrenaline. It surfaces quietly without agenda. That is why the palace did not respond. Responding would have required reframing an experience that was already processed internally. Silence allowed dignity to remain intact. Public interpretation now moves differently. This is no longer a story about speculation. It is a story about endurance, about how much was held without display, about how reassurance and severity can coexist without contradiction. There is also an institutional lesson here. Transparency does not always mean detail. Sometimes it means timing. Choosing when to speak and when not to is itself a form of honesty. As Catherine's recovery continues, attention will naturally shift toward presence rather than explanation. Appearances will speak more clearly than statements. Energy levels, pacing, and comfort will communicate what words cannot. The public, having absorbed the nurse's words, now views those signs with greater understanding. Not suspicion, but empathy. That shift is significant. It allows space without pressure. It replaces curiosity with patience, and patience in moments like this is the greatest form of respect. What remains clear is this: whatever was faced was not minor, not simple, and not easily summarized. It required quiet strength, disciplined care, and a willingness to let uncertainty exist without public reassurance. That is not weakness. It is control exercised at its highest level. As understanding deepened, attention quietly shifted from what happened to how it was endured. This was no longer about a single remark or a momentary lapse in privacy. It became about the architecture of resilience, built around Catherine during a time when certainty was scarce and pressure constant. Those who have observed royal households during periods of strain describe a distinct pattern. Life narrows. External priorities fade. The focus contracts to a small, protected circle where decisions are made quickly and emotions are managed carefully. In Catherine's case, that circle appears to have been unusually tight. Fewer voices, fewer variables, less risk. Medical routines reportedly became the backbone of each day. Not dramatic interventions, but consistency. Timing mattered. Rest mattered. Energy was treated as something finite, to be preserved rather than spent. Even well-intentioned interruptions were limited. In high-pressure recovery, stability is not passive, it is constructed deliberately. This environment reshaped how public life was approached. Engagements were no longer planned weeks ahead with confidence. They were evaluated one by one closer to the moment. Visibility became conditional, not because of fear, but because of respect for limits that were still being tested. William's role during this phase evolved further. He became not just a partner, but a buffer, shielding Catherine from unnecessary demands, absorbing pressure that would otherwise have reached her. This is rarely visible to the public, but it is essential in moments when resilience depends on reducing exposure rather than increasing reassurance. Observers later noted how he adjusted his own public rhythm. Fewer spontaneous interactions, more deliberate appearances, a tone that remained warm but measured. These changes did not suggest alarm. They suggested calculation, a conscious effort to keep everything balanced. Within the household, emotional regulation became as important as physical recovery. Maintaining calm does not mean denying fear. It means preventing fear from becoming dominant. Those close to the family say conversations were grounded, practical, and future-focused without being speculative. The emphasis was always on what could be controlled. Catherine herself reportedly approached recovery with characteristic discipline. She did not rush milestones. She did not frame progress publicly. She focused on consistency rather than visibility. That choice aligns with someone who understands that healing is not linear, and that pressure to appear better can undermine actual improvement. The nurse's words, when viewed through this lens, feel less like a revelation and more like an echo. An echo of moments when uncertainty pressed hardest, when outcomes were not guaranteed, when calm had to be practiced, not assumed. It is important to understand that severity in medical terms does not always manifest outwardly. A person can appear composed while navigating internal difficulty. Strength in such cases is not the absence of struggle. It is the ability to function alongside it. This may explain why public reassurance remained steady even as private vigilance continued. The two are not opposites. They are parallel tracks. One maintains public stability. The other protects personal well-being. As time passed and the most intense phase eased, the family did not rush to mark recovery with symbolism. There were no declarations of relief, no emotional statements designed to close the story. Instead, life resumed gradually, almost quietly. That restraint suggests respect for what had been endured. The palace's continued silence, following the nurse's comment, further supports this interpretation. There was no attempt to correct perception because perception had not crossed into falsehood. The comment did not contradict reality. It contextualized it emotionally. In institutions accustomed to controlling narrative, choosing not to intervene can be deliberate. It allows a moment to pass without amplifying it. It signals confidence that the broader truth does not require defense. Public response during this phase shifted noticeably. Speculation softened. Commentary slowed. The conversation became less about curiosity and more about acknowledgement. That shift reflects a growing understanding that not every story requires resolution through detail. For many, this moment reframed Catherine's recent presence. When she did appear, it was seen not as performance but as choice. Choice made carefully with awareness of limits. That perception fosters respect rather than expectation. There is also a long-term implication here. Experiences like this tend to shape how individuals engage with public life afterward. Boundaries become clearer. Priorities sharpen. The value of privacy becomes less theoretical and more lived. Those close to Catherine suggests that this period reinforced her existing approach rather than changing it. She has always emphasized balance, well-being, and intention. What has changed is depth. The understanding that these principles are not just ideals, but necessities. For William, the experience appears to have reinforced a leadership style rooted in protection and patience. He did not seek reassurance from visibility. He sought stability through presence where it mattered most. As the story continues to settle, what remains is not unanswered questions, but a clear picture of endurance. Endurance built quietly, without spectacle, without explanation. The nurse's words may linger in public memory, but they no longer feel disruptive. They feel explanatory. They remind audiences that behind controlled communication were moments of genuine concern, managed with discipline rather than drama. And perhaps that is the most accurate understanding of this period. Not crisis broadcast, but difficulty carried. Not fear displayed, but uncertainty navigated. The story does not demand more detail to be complete. It demands respect for what was never meant to be seen. With time, the sharp edges of uncertainty began to soften, not because answers emerged, but because the need for them diminished. This is often how difficult periods truly end, not with explanation, but with acceptance. The family did not announce a turning point. They allowed one to arrive quietly. As Catherine's strength gradually stabilized, the emphasis shifted from protection to balance. Not a return to normal, but an adjustment to a new rhythm informed by experience. Appearances, when they came, were measured. Energy was managed. Nothing suggested urgency. Everything suggested intention. This approach signaled something important. Whatever had been faced was no longer being reacted to. It was being integrated. Integration is the final stage of endurance, when survival gives way to sustainability. The absence of fanfare confirmed that recovery was not a performance to be demonstrated, but a state to be maintained. Within royal life, this distinction is critical. There is constant pressure to reassure through visibility. Yet the family resisted that impulse. They allowed presence to speak for itself. When Catherine appeared, she did so without commentary. When she did not, silence filled the space without explanation. That consistency reinforced trust. Observers noted that public perception had changed. Earlier curiosity gave way to patience. Expectations softened. The audience no longer searched for signals of improvement or concern. They simply accepted what was shown. That shift marked the end of narrative tension. William's demeanor during this period reflected the same evolution. The vigilance that once defined his presence eased into steadiness. Not relief, but confidence. Confidence that the most demanding phase had passed, and that what remained could be managed without constant defense. This does not mean the experience faded. Moments like these leave imprints. They shape decisions long after headlines move on. They influence boundaries, pacing, and priorities in subtle but lasting ways. Those close to the family suggest that this period reaffirmed existing values rather than altering them. Privacy became non-negotiable. Health was treated as foundational, not secondary. Public duty remained important, but never at the expense of well-being. The nurse's words, which once felt disruptive, now occupy a different place in the story. They are no longer a point of tension. They are a marker, a reminder of how much was carried before reassurance became possible. Their power lies not in revelation, but in validation. Validation that calm was earned. That reassurance followed effort. That strength was practiced, not assumed. The palace's decision to let the comment pass without engagement now appears deliberate. Responding would have prolonged a moment that had already served its purpose. Silence allowed the narrative to settle organically. As public attention shifted elsewhere, the family regained something essential. Space. Space to move forward without explanation. Space to exist without interpretation. That space is often the truest measure of resolution. In the broader context, this episode reinforces a truth often forgotten in public life. Transparency is not measured by detail. It is measured by integrity. Saying only what can be said responsibly is not concealment. It is care. Catherine's continued approach reflects this principle. She did not reclaim visibility to correct perception. She allowed perception to adjust naturally. That choice suggests confidence, not avoidance. For audiences, the story now reads differently than it did at the beginning. What once felt ambiguous now feels complete. Not because everything is known, but because enough is understood. Enough to recognize that the situation demanded patience. Enough to see that recovery required discipline. Enough to respect that some experiences are not meant to be narrated in full. As time passes. This period will likely be remembered not for what was said, but for how it was handled. Quietly, consistently, without dramatization. That handling speaks to a maturity that has defined William and Catherine's approach to public life. They do not rush moments into meaning. They allow meaning to emerge through continuity. In doing so, they model something rare. The ability to endure privately while maintaining public responsibility. The ability to set boundaries without defensiveness. The ability to move forward without erasing what came before. This story does not close with certainty or declaration. It closes with stability. And stability, after uncertainty, is the most convincing outcome of all. What remains is not a question, but a recognition. Recognition that behind careful words were difficult days, that behind calm appearances was deliberate restraint, and that behind silence was strength. The public does not need more detail to understand that. Understanding has already arrived, and with that understanding, the story finds its natural end, not with answers, but with respect.